I'm SaltWire weather specialist Allister Aalders. We have all been keeping a very close eye on Hurricane Lee, and the storm will be impacting the weather across the region this weekend for some areas more than others, but we'll break down the entire regional outlook in this update. And we'll start with a look at Lee on the satellite imagery. You can see it's not a very well-defined hurricane, still a Category 1 storm though, but look at the sheer size of this storm. The outer cloud bands extend now into Nova Scotia, so this is a large storm and it will be growing in size as it continues to move towards Atlantic Canada this weekend. The latest National Hurricane Center track brings Lee northward as a Category 1 hurricane through Friday night and into Saturday morning. Landfall a bit sooner than expected, but likely in Yarmouth County between 2 and 4 o'clock on our Saturday afternoon. The storm will become post-tropical during that time, but likely still the equivalent of a tropical storm with winds sustained near 110 kilometers per hour as it moves over the region. And then it will turn towards the northeast and pass near the Great Northern Peninsula in Newfoundland early next week. So as we take a look at the latest weather timeline, because the storm has sped up a bit, the impacts have also sped up. So we have periods of rain developing across Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick overnight tonight and into the early hours of Saturday morning. Winds will also be picking up, generally gusting 40 to 70 kilometers per hour, but those gusts of 90 to 110 starting to pop up along the south shore of Nova Scotia down towards Yarmouth and as well for the southwest corner of New Brunswick. As we go throughout the day on Saturday, it will be periods of rain that will fall heavy at times, especially along the track as it makes landfall in the region. Note too that as the storm makes landfall, the winds in parts of the southwest could become lighter for a period, but will pick back up again. But you can see generally winds gusting 50 to 70 kilometers per hour, but those stronger winds will be felt along the south shore of Nova Scotia. Now, as we go through Saturday night and into Sunday, the rain starts to become lighter. The rain becomes more scattered. The winds will still be strong for the first half of our Sunday, but the system will slowly clear. We could actually see a bit of sunshine for some areas later in the day on Sunday, and the winds will also become lighter as we go through Sunday night. For Newfoundland and Labrador, outer bands of rain will start to arrive later in the day on Saturday, periods of rain with a few embedded downpours possible. But really, it's a Sunday story for Newfoundland and Labrador with periods of rain that could fall heavy at times across Newfoundland and Labrador and winds gusting 40 to 70 kilometers per hour. You can see the center of Lee moves through, and we're just left with a few scattered showers as we go into Monday, but winds still gusting 30 to 60, perhaps 70 kilometers per hour. And as we take a look at the probability of tropical storm force sustained winds, which would be 63 kilometers per hour or higher, you can see it's a near 100% chance for the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia. So that will be sustained winds of 63, gusting upwards of possibly 110 or even 120 kilometers per hour. But much of the western half of Nova Scotia has a high chance of seeing these tropical storm force sustained winds, especially along the direct coastlines. We could also see this in southwestern New Brunswick as well. But because the storm will be weakening as it moves through, so will the winds, and that threat will diminish as the storm passes. But as we take a look at the peak wind map for the Maritime provinces, I haven't made a whole lot of changes. However, I have brought the area of winds gusting up to 90 to 110 into the coastal Halifax area. Winds in Halifax could be close to 90, but especially along the coast is where we could see those stronger gusts. But this will extend along the south shore into the southwest and for southwestern New Brunswick. Now, keep in mind that directly along the coast from Queens County down to Yarmouth, so Clark's Harbor, Bacaro Point, we could be looking at winds gusting upwards of 110 to 130 kilometers per hour. But for the rest of Nova Scotia, winds generally gusting anywhere from 60 to 80 kilometers per hour, perhaps some gusts along exposed coastlines up to 90. That includes Cape Breton. And as well, we could see some winds up to 100 at Lace Wet winds gusting Marguerite Harbour to Bay St. Lawrence, 60 to 80 kilometer per hour winds across PEI, and as well much of New Brunswick, but some lighter winds in the northern portion of that province. For Newfoundland and Labrador, winds generally gusting 40 to 70 kilometers per hour, sustained generally 20 to perhaps 40 up to 50 kilometers per hour. The latest rainfall outlook, so you can see the heaviest rain will be along the track of Lee, which will be from southwestern New Brunswick to the northeast, where we're looking at 50 to 100 millimeters of rain. But this model hinting that we could see localized amounts of 100 to 150 millimeters. The western half of Nova Scotia also looking at 50 to 100 millimeters, and some models are indicating that we could see local amounts of 100 to 150. So these locations have the greatest threat for flash flooding due to heavy rain. But really, rainfall will not be significant elsewhere, 10 to 30 millimeters in general, with local amounts from embedded downpours or thunderstorms of 30 to 50 millimeters. And a general 10 to 30 millimeters for Newfoundland and Labrador. Some localized pockets, especially along the Great Northern Peninsula, where Lee tracks of 30 to 50 millimeters. So the waves will also be a major concern, especially along the Atlantic coast and the southwest Fundy coast, where we could be looking at wave heights upwards of 8 to 12 meters, especially along the south shore, 5 to 8 meter waves along the eastern shore, 3 to 6 meter waves in the Bay of Fundy. But the greatest threat for storm surge will be along the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia, 3 to 6 meter waves along the shores in Newfoundland, and 2 to 4 meter waves for the north-facing coastlines in Prince Edward Island, likely a bit lower for the Northumberland Strait. And those waves will start to diminish as Lee passes. But as we take a look at the wave heights and the tide times, because this will be critical as Lee makes landfall and passes through how it coincides with high tide, we will have high tides on Saturday morning and Saturday night. So keep an eye on those times. We need to watch out for storm surge during these times, which could lead to coastal flooding, coastal erosion. And as I mentioned, the storm surge threat will be greatest during these 2 periods, or even in some cases, 3 periods for parts of the Bay of Fundy coastline. So we need to take that seriously as we go through the weekend. Follow any advice from local officials if there are any evacuations that do come from any storm surge. So the latest on Lee, as I mentioned, 50 to 90 kilometer per hour wind gusts generally, but 90 to 120 for southwestern Nova Scotia and southwestern New Brunswick, 50 to 100 plus millimeters of rain for much of New Brunswick in the western half of Nova Scotia, but local amounts of 100 to 150 millimeters. The storm surge threat greatest along the Atlantic and Fundy coast with 6 to 12 meter waves possible. And because this will be growing in size, impacts will be felt right across the region. I know for some of us, this might just seem like a typical weather event, but this will be impactful for a lot of us, so it does need to be taken seriously. SaltWire, of course, is keeping a very close eye on Lee. We'll have updates throughout the weekend on our website, saltwire.com.